Last week, we talked about something many parents don't expect after a long season of pain. The quiet moment when God begins inviting you back into life again. Not that He hasn't been encouraging you to live the whole time. Maybe it's just that we are finally at a place to accept this invitation. Not quickly, not dramatically, but gently. We talked about spiritual winter seasons and how renewal often begins with small stirrings rather than sudden change. And if you're listening to this episode right now in March, you can probably step right outside your door and notice that that is what is happening with the perennials that are poking their head up through the dirt. But as those stirrings begin, another challenge often appears: courage. Because stepping back into life when your child's story is still unresolved can feel incredibly vulnerable. Today, we're talking about what courage looks like when the outcome is still unknown. Not the kind of courage that feels loud or heroic, but the quiet courage of continuing to trust God one step at a time. Hi, welcome to Still Faithful, a Bridge Between Us podcast series for parents walking hard, unresolved journeys. I'm your host and in the trenches partner, Melinda Patrick. This is a space for honesty without shame, faith without pressure, and movement without forcing outcomes. Together, we're learning what it looks like to stay spiritually anchored, emotionally steady, and rooted in love, even when parenting hurts and the story isn't finished. And before I get into today's episode, I also want to pause and I want to thank every listener that has sent me an email and or left a review on the podcast or on my book, The Daring Rescue. I can't tell you how difficult this journey can be at times, but your words of encouragement, knowing that God is meeting you right here through these resources, it gives me courage to keep moving forward. So I just want to thank you. Thank you for partnering with me, and thank you for helping me to spread the message of hope to other hurting families. Let's get into today's episode. When we hear the word courage, we often imagine something dramatic: standing firm, being fearless, speaking boldly, meeting your Goliath head on, and not backing down. But in painful parenting seasons, courage rarely looks like that. More often, it looks like uncertainty. You still have questions. You still don't know how the story will unfold, and your child's choices may still break your heart. And yet you continue showing up, praying, and loving. That kind of courage is quieter, but it is no less real. Many of us believe courage requires certainty. We think, if I just knew how this would turn out, I could keep going. But courage rarely comes after certainty. Courage comes when certainty is absent. I think about David. When he went to face Goliath, he had no idea what the outcome was going to be. But it took courage for this young man to step in front of that giant. It's choosing to walk forward even when the future remains unclear. Scripture is full of other people also who trusted God without knowing the ending. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where he was going. The disciples followed Jesus without understanding the path ahead. Esther went before the king not knowing if that would end her life. Faith has never been about having the whole story in advance. It's always been about trusting God with the next step. Sometimes parents feel overwhelmed because they believe they must trust God with the entire future. Instead, he invites us to trust him today, just today, trusting him with the next conversation, the next prayer, the next moment of surrender. When we narrow our focus to the present, courage actually becomes more possible. We stop trying to carry the entire story and we simply walk with God in the step we are in. I love that in John 15, Jesus talks about us abiding in him. And that's what this looks like. Simply walking with God in the step we are in. One of the hardest realities parents face is this: there are no guarantees. Your child may not change quickly. Relationships may remain complicated. Prayers may take longer to answer than you hoped. And yet, faith invites us to continue showing up anyway, showing up with love, honesty, and an open heart. Not because we know the outcome, but because we trust the one who holds the story. And again, that makes me think of David. He trusted the one who had been faithful his entire life. Courage in this season might look like allowing yourself to hope again, even if hope feels risky. Choosing not to close your heart in self-protection. Continuing to trust God when your emotions feel uncertain. Letting your faith remain tender instead of hardened. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to let pain turn into bitterness. And sometimes courage is choosing to remain open. I want you to take a moment and sit with these questions. I'll put them in the show notes. What am I afraid to hope for? Where might God be inviting me to trust him one step at a time? What might courage look like in this season of my life? And remember, courage may not look like being strong. Sometimes courage looks like staying open before the Lord. If your story feels unfinished, you're not alone. Faith often unfolds in the middle of uncertainty. And courage does not mean you stop feeling afraid. It simply means you continue walking with God even when the path ahead is unclear. Friend, God has entrusted this journey and your child to you. And as you continue trusting him, one day at a time, he will equip you for each next step. I'll talk to you next week, friend.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bridge Between Us podcast with Melinda Patrick. To find out more, go to melindapatrick.org. Once you're there, you can check out the many resources that Melinda has available. Also, you can book Melinda for your next speaking engagement. Just click on the speaking tab at the top of the page for more information. All of this can be found at melindapatrick.org. Thank you for listening in today. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of The Bridge Between Us with Melinda Patrick.